Hey, so as promised, I'm going to do a couple more readings. Tonight I have two kind of shorter segments, and then next week I'll have one that's maybe a little bit longer. But as I had mentioned before, the book is made up of these little vignettes where we kind of pop in and out of people's lives at different times through Jenny's life, or the duration, I guess, of kind of the timeline of the book. And so I have two that I'm going to read tonight. One is this character, Barrons, and this is, I don't know, 36 pages in or so. And then the other one's going to be one about the stock herself, Jenny, when she turns 8 months. So this one, you don't really need to know a whole lot to set it up. And that was kind of my hope with these short pieces, is that you could just kind of get a slice of their life. And obviously they build up to something bigger than that. So shout out to Kevin Smith and his Jay and Silent Bob Reboot Roadshow that Gail and I went to in St. Paul. That was fun. So at the Fitzgerald. Good times. Anyway, so Barrons was a man who liked to collect things. Beyond the simple ownership of valuable things, Barrons valued the completion of a set. While some people sought items of highest value, rookie cards for instance, Barrons liked having the complete set of cards released that year. He knew that the majority of those cards would be almost entirely worthless, but in his mind, the entirety of the set was incredibly valuable. In part, this was because of Barrons' obsessive nature, but it also harkened back to a moment of his childhood that he no longer recalled. This is not because he had blocked the memory or worked to forget it, but rather it was the natural progression of things. Nearing 40, some memories simply slipped away, but the experiences still defined him. 30-some years previous, Barrons had been playing with his Hot Wheels cars in his driveway. His driveway was sloped, and it had been recently resurfaced and sealed, which meant it was the perfect surface to race his cars on. He sat at the top of the driveway, with his cars neatly lined up, and sent them one by one down the driveway. None of them reached the bottom of the driveway yet. Most gained speed and then bounced erratically and wound up on their side or top. Some, like his double-decker bus, had made it all the way to the sidewalk without tipping or crashing. Barron saved his two favorite cars for last. One was his purple 1973 Dodge Charger SE with a ridiculously large engine sticking out of the hood. It was part of a 5-car set of 70s muscle cars. This car was special. Most of his cars were the ones his mother bought at garage sales, and so they were typically scratched and abused, but his Dodge Charger, called the Roger Dodger by Hot Wheels, maybe to avoid a lawsuit over a copyrighted name, was in pristine condition. His father had given it to him when he had gone on a business trip. He'd told Barrons, "I used to have a 73 Charger like this. It wasn't purple and the engine wasn't this big, but it was a sweet ride." Barrons sat there holding the Charger, debating whether or not he should even race the car down the driveway, fearing that it might get scratched. Eventually, he let the car go, and down it went. It dodged, appropriately given its name. The other cars tipped on their sides and raced towards the sidewalk. Barrons thought for sure it would hit the crack at the sidewalk and go flying, but somehow the wheels rolled right over the crack without slowing. The sidewalk wasn't sloped like the driveway, but the Roger Dodger was still moving at a good clip. Barrons stood to get a better view and started walking down the driveway after his car. It made it clear to the end of the driveway, hit the crack where the apron of the driveway met the street, bounced, and tumbled into the road where it was run over by a passing actual car. The toy was thrown from the wheel of the car, tumbled, and came to a stop beside the curb. Barrons retrieved the Roger Dodger from the road and inspected the damage. Because these cars were made of steel, it was still in good shape. He tested the wheels and found that the back axle had been bent and the wheels were pressed up into the upper frame of the car. Barrons wondered if his father could fix this, the way he told Barrons about working on his actual 73 Charger. Barrons turned the car over in his hand and found, to his dismay, a large scratch on the roof of the car. The toy must have been dragged by the actual car or pressed into a stone or something, because there was a 1/4-inch gash of steel exposed where the purple should have been. The boy ran into his house, leaving his second favorite car unraced. It was a lime green convertible 63 Ford Mustang II, and all the other cars on the driveway, and took his Roger Dodger to his desk in his room. He dug through the crayons and found a purple that was close to the color of his damaged toy and tried to color it. Unfortunately, the wax didn't adhere well to the steel. He left the car on his desk and went out to retrieve his remaining toys. On the way, he met his father coming into the house. His father had decided to surprise everyone by coming home for lunch, and Barrons could tell he was angry before he even opened his mouth. "Jesus, what is it, all this shit all over the driveway? I almost broke my ankle stepping on." Barrons didn't hear the rest because he was running to the driveway where he found his father's car parked, and his toy cars were either currently being crushed by its tires or had recently been crushed by its tires. Miraculously, the Mustang survived the destruction, and Barrons quickly pocketed it. He salvaged the cars the best he could and went back into the house. The ones that were too broken he discarded. The rest he left in a basket, but the '63 lime green convertible he placed on a shelf where it would remain until he packed his room for college. That day, he learned that nice things were meant to be protected, and since the Mustang looked so lonely on the shelf all by itself, separate from its other '70s muscle cars that were damaged when his father came home unexpectedly, Barrons also learned to value a complete set. He tried to reassemble that 5-car set, but he didn't have money of his own, and his parents didn't seem to understand why he might want an identical set to one that he already had. Further, even when he convinced them that he did, they couldn't seem to remember, or maybe they didn't care, what that set consisted of, and bought him other 5-car sets that were not the correct ones. This was why Barrons valued complete sets of things, and in a way, the orphans that Sloane tipped him off about were a set to complete as well. Barrons knew that Reich viewed the orphans as just a part of a larger portfolio of investments, but for Barrons, the orphans were a unique and separate set all of their own. He, with the help of Sloane, created this set and was responsible for it, just as he was saddened by the loss of his 5-car '70s muscle car set and frustrated by the single lime green reminder of his loss. Barrons was also obsessed with the performance of his set of orphans. He tracked their performances, reviewed their files, and did everything he could to ensure a positive return on investment for his employer. So there's lots of little stories about each of the characters, especially with childhood. I mean, kids just kind of run through the story. Obviously, that's the big focus, is investing in kids. And so I thought it'd be important to include these kind of moments of the adult characters and kind of shed light on what their childhood was like as well. This section is a little bit longer. So this is the stock turns 8 months. It's the beginning of this section. I think it's the first one that we really see Jenny in. And she appears, I guess, on page 55 or so. It begins. "You can do it," Steve crooned, while crouching with a video camera to one eye and gesturing with his free hand. "Come on, Jenny." Jenny stood, but barely. Her knees wobbled and she wavered back and forth on the verge of collapse. It was clear she was concentrating. Her eyes were wide, as if that might help her stand, and her lips were pressed tightly together. She looked at Steve. "She'll walk when she's ready, hon. Give her time. Don't push her." Jenna was fascinated by Jenny's progress, too. How could she not be? They had wanted children so bad and had pursued every possible avenue to have their own, and then, 11 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars later, they adopted. This was their little girl. Of course Jenna wanted to see her walk, but she also wanted to savor every last moment. First they crawl, then they walk, then they run right out of your life. That was the wisdom Jenna had received from her own mother. "She's ready, I can tell, just look at her." Jenny continued to wobble. "She looks like a little tightrope walker, except the floor is her tightrope." That made Jenna laugh. Steve loved making her laugh. It was a glorious sound. He was glad he could still surprise her into a laugh. It's easy to make a new partner laugh, even if only awkwardly, but someone you've known for 14 years, that was impressive. Of course, Jenna was tired. What new parents weren't? But tiredness does have a way of making things funnier, or more annoying. "The camera's going to run out of juice," Jenna said. "Don't you think it's enough for tonight?" That was a good point. How many minutes were left? Steve adjusted his eye to see the meter. "I still have a good 30 minutes, he said. And when he looked back through the finder, Jenny was taking a step. She was just like a tightrope walker. She put her right foot in front of the other and adjusted her balance. She tested the weight and then lifted the back foot. Steve and Jenna thought she was going to fall, but they both stood stock still and waited. Jenny needed to learn this one way or another on her own. If she fell, it would be a minor setback. Maybe she'd crawl a little longer. That wouldn't be so horrible. But she didn't fall. It was a miracle. And of course they holy shitted and oh my goded and you saw that, righted? The camera captured it all, and the video titled proudly Our Little Jenny Walks at 8 Months, was watched and rewatched and shared and viewed and liked and plussed and everything else. They were exactly as excited and as proud as two new parents should be whose child had just walked for the first time, and at an early age at that, but they didn't fully realize just how significantly their lives would forever be altered. Now, they are behind the curve for baby-proofing their house. Suddenly, if they left Jenny in a room, even if just for a moment, maybe to get a cup of coffee or use the bathroom, they couldn't be sure that she'd be in that same room when they got back. She was fully mobile. Combine that with her being vocal, they were sure she was using words and understood them way ahead of schedule, and they no longer had a cute, passive being in their house. They had another, fully functioning person under the roof. And Steve and Jenna knew one more thing. This girl had potential. The next day, they were meeting with a financial advisor. It had been on their to-do list forever and always postponed. But now, with Jenny, everything had a new urgency. They had to plan for their future. They had to make sure she was being taken care of in case something happened. She was the impetus for so many things they knew were important, but without her, they would have continued to delay. So now, here they were with Tomas Moody. Jenna had acquired Tomas's card years ago, and after Jenny walked, it was the first thing she reached for after she hit submit on her My Life post with the video. Jenny, right? Tomas asked. He knew the answer. He didn't forget that kind of thing, but he found asking the question tended to ease people into the types of conversations they were about to have. And by asking it, it called attention to the fact that he did remember. Yes, Jenna said. She's our little girl. How old? 8 months, Steve and Jenna said at the same time. Steve was reaching for his phone. Really? Tomas said. This wasn't a show. Walking already? He came to regret the question. 10 minutes later, after viewing the video and finally corralling the conversation back in, they were ready to start. Okay, Tomas said. You're here, which means you're already making the right steps. And I don't just mean with me, but, kudos on the great taste, but really with anyone. I can't tell you how many parents wait and wait and wait and never get around to estate planning. It's a nightmare when something does happen. We don't like to think about it, of course, but even if you remain healthy until the end, death does eventually come. If you're lucky enough to have children or loved ones, then you're going to leave them behind to clean up the mess. It's best to be clear about your intentions, your wants, and to be able to help them respect your wishes as best as possible. Tomas paused and waited to give either parent an opportunity to say something, but neither did. Even Jenny seemed to be paying careful attention. All right, let's start with the fun stuff first and ease into the rest. You already have a My Life account and clearly are active, which is good. Hit that hard and often. You have to remember, kids are a commodity, a brand, and as parents, it's your job to establish that and control the narrative. Unfortunately, you have a small window in which to do that. We don't like to think about it, but kids have a shelf life of cuteness. Tomas had given this speech enough times to know this is where parents started to doubt him, and he liked to work with that tension. I know. Parents love their kids regardless of what terrible monsters they grow into. He laughed and hoped they would too, and they did. But seriously, you have a window from your sonograms to age 9 or 10, 12 if you're really lucky, where you can capitalize on how adorable they are. You know, all the silly things they do and say, and their wonderful naive musings on the world. Those things are hot and sell like nobody's business. Lightning in a bottle, whatever metaphor or simile you want to use. Jenny scrunched up her face and looked at Jenna as if prompting her to say something, and she did. What happens after 10? Are you dog or cat people? Tomas asked. Excuse me? Steve asked. Hang with me. Do you like dogs or cats? We like both, but I guess cats more, Jenna said. Why? Do you think more adult cats get adopted or more kittens? Kittens, said Jenna. But people do adopt adult cats too, Steve added. Right, but if you're a cat in the shelter, which do you want to be, a kitten or an adult cat? Tomas asked. Kitten, said Jenna. 100% of kittens in shelters get adopted, said Tomas. Want to guess the percentage of adult cats? Neither Jenna nor Steve answered. I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't prepare you. Your future is now also her future, and the best thing you can do for your collective future is to push Jenny on My Life. Get investors now. They're lazy. They'll buy shares now and not think about it again until she's graduating, and then they're getting their little payout. But it's a much harder sell if they have to wait until Jenny's 9 or 10 or 12. At that age, they're wonderful and amazing, but it's harder to convince others of that. You show them a cute baby covered in chocolate frosting, that's all you have to do. There's no hard sell, there's no arm twisting, there's nothing. Sometimes you don't even need a caption or a hashtag. Tomas paused and looked at the family. He smiled. We okay? I know it's an awkward talk, but it's an important one. Thank you for that, Jenna said. It's what we needed to hear. Okay. Now for the less fun, but equally important things. He went through it all. Jenny squirmed now and then, and Jenna fed her, and they each took turns entertaining her, and eventually she fell asleep on Steve's shoulder. Tomas walked them through the wills and estate planning and different financial arrangements and possibilities. Steve and Jenna took notes, even though Tomas told them that he'd send digital portfolios with links and notes based on his suggestions, and then they were done. Steve was nearly as exhausted as Jenna was, and he longed for a family nap. But he knew they had done the right thing by not putting this meeting off any longer. Thank you, said Steve. He shook Tomas's hand. No problem, it's literally my job, Tomas said. Jenna laughed. She was very glad she had held on to his card all these years. Just before they walked out the door, Tomas touched Steve on the shoulder and said, It's less than 10%. Steve frowned, and then nodded. If you're anything like me, not knowing would have kept you up all night, Tomas said, smiling and showing them the rest of the way out. Thanks so much. Hope you enjoyed the book. Love to hear your conversations and questions. Shoot me a message if you have any. Have a great night.